return my clients with disability.
Wanted to welcome everyone to our event today. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to be starting in just a few minutes. We're going to be recording this event, and so if you missed something or if you want other people to see what you saw today, you'll be able to let them know that it is available online at the Mackinac Center website under the Events tab, and you'll be able to share that with them. So continue enjoying your lunch, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Hey, Miriam.
Hi,
Armstrong.
good to
meet
see
you.
you.
How are you? Good to see you too.
Good,
How was the trip in?
You know, it was good until I got here on time and then couldn't find parking. It
I'm the
circled
same.
around and around.
Yeah.
I was kind of like a way up at the conventions. Yeah, is that what it is? Yeah.
And then
The governor's
bunch.
Yeah.
Drops. So it's just a lot.
Do you came from Grand Rapids?
I came from Grand Rapids.
Okay.
So.
Is that fairly
Oh, it was
smooth?
easy. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
the weather was good. You know, you never know when you schedule things in February.
It's a bad month.
I had to go to court in Alpena last week, which is like a 4.5-hour drive, you know, across the strait up north. And I mean, it was fine, but when I got the court date, I thought, oh, this has the potential of being really terrible. And you know, it was still 9 hours on the road, but it wasn't 24 hours on the road, right, or something like that, right?
And there are only 2 ways to get in there. We have family that has a place in the lake. They said, don't go this way because we're working on it.
Yeah. No, it was. I'd never been to Alpena before.
It's pretty.
It's pretty.
Yeah.
It's really pretty. So it's a beautiful courthouse.
It's very beautiful.
Courthouse.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Alpena. That claim to fame. Well, welcome everyone once again to this Issues and Ideas Forum brought to you by the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. My name is Dan Armstrong. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Center. And we'd like to welcome those who are watching on our webcast today. And you'll be able to watch this once again when we're completed. This video will be posted on our website. We're thrilled to have you all here today, getting more information and investing in your own education about this topic of overcriminalization in Michigan. We have many materials at our table, which I'm sure you saw on the way in. We also have a study on the table that we invite you to take with you. If you need additional copies of those, let us know. We'd be happy to provide you with those. But please do take at least one for yourself and maybe one for someone else who may be interested in this same topic of overcriminalization. You'll notice some cards at your table. They're question cards. We find it's easiest to simply write your question on the card, then we collect the cards and we ask them all at the same time at the very end. And it also helps with repeating questions. We're able to get through those pretty quickly. If some people have similar questions, we're able to get through those quickly. So if you do have a question about this, we anticipate a very robust question and answer time. So please do ask your question via those cards. And then if we aren't able to get to all of those cards, we will be able to have some one-on-one time following this event with our speakers today. We also invite you maybe saw the banner on the way in here is Vote Spotter. That is our government accountability tool that will let you know when important votes are being taken in Lansing, and you are able to rate your legislator with a thumbs up or a thumbs down on that app. And then you're able to contact your legislator either via email or phone call. It's the easiest way to keep your elected officials accountable. And again, that's Vote Spotter, all one word, in the Apple Store or also Google Play. We invite you to download that at any time here. So now I want to introduce you to our speakers today. First off, Miriam Aukerman. She joined the ACLU of Michigan in December of 2010 as a staff attorney for the newly opened West Michigan Regional Office. In addition to building a robust legal program in West Michigan, Aukerman participates in advocacy activities such as public speaking, media interviews, and outreach work to increase understanding of constitutional rights and the ACLU's work. And the Mackinac Center and ACLU of Michigan have partnered up on several examples of policies, Freedom of Information Act. We find common ground on open government, those kinds of things. So it's our pleasure to welcome Miriam to our event today. Please welcome her. James Copland is a senior fellow and the director of the Manhattan Institute's Center of Legal Policy, which seeks to develop and communicate thoughtful ideas of how to improve the civil and criminal justice system. Copland oversees two of the Institute's websites, pointoflaw.com, website. It's a magazine that brings together information and the opinion of the U.S. legal system, and also proxymonitor.org. It's an online database of shareholder proposals at America's largest publicly traded companies. Please welcome James today. Last but not least, Mike Reitz is the Executive Vice President of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, and also James and Mike are co-authors, along with Isaac Gorodetsky, who is also here on this study. So if you do have questions about this study specifically, all three authors are here today that you were able to ask them questions. Now, prior to joining the Mackinac Center, Mike Reitz spent 8 years with the Freedom Foundation, and he is also a board member on the board of directors for the Michigan Coalition for Open Government. Let's welcome Mike today, and then we'll turn it over to him.
Thanks, Dan, and it's a great pleasure to be here today with all of you on a day that I know is very busy here in the Capitol, and so we appreciate your willingness to take time to be here. I also wanted to note that this is a topic that has drawn significant attention from many, many different sectors, and so it's just a great pleasure to be able to address this both with the Mackinac Center and the Manhattan Institute and ACLU of Michigan, coming at it from slightly different perspectives, perhaps, but there's a lot of common ground, and I think that is very promising when you look at reforms that should take place here in the near future. My role today is really not to give you a whole lot of information. That's up to the other panelists. I'm going to sort of take the privilege of asking questions and driving things a little bit. But I did want to say a couple things about where I think we are today on the issue of overcriminalization. Now, if you're here, you're probably aware of it, but one of the questions that we get at the Mackinac Center quite a bit is, well, what do you mean by overcriminalization? Aren't criminal law is a good thing? Don't we want to lock up bad people? Well, sure. But over time, what we've seen is that in state legislatures and also in Congress, there's obviously a need to justify their roles and pass new laws. And so state lawmakers and congressmen or Congress folks are very focused on enacting new laws. There's very little attention, though, given to pruning outdated or outmoded laws from the books. And so what you have over decades and decades of new criminal laws being enacted is that many things have perhaps fallen out of practice in terms of prosecutions and arrests and convictions and incarceration. But you've got this criminal code that's overcrowded, that is outdated in many cases, and really useless to enforcing a good civil society in some of the activities that it regulates. And we'll talk about a couple of those examples. Dan mentioned a paper that we had the privilege of publishing with the Manhattan Institute. And what we did there is we looked at the number of laws in the books, because that was an early question that we got. Well, how many laws are on the books that we should be worried about? And Jim will talk about that a little bit later. We answered that question, and then we also started finding examples of what we started calling in the office just silly laws. You know, these are laws that just don't make any sense anymore to have on the books. And so we've got some recommendations on how to deal with that. Just back to the question of what do we mean by overcriminalization, and I'll wrap up with that. We think that refers to three different unique problems in the criminal code. One is a code that, as I mentioned before, is just so overpopulated, the average person could not keep track of the number of laws that are on the books. When you've got thousands of state regulations, thousands of federal crimes, and then the administrative regulatory regime that falls underneath that, you're talking about potentially tens of thousands of criminal prohibitions on conduct in any given state, and that's not, and that certainly is the case here in Michigan. And so, overcriminalization is a way to capture that idea of having so many laws in the books that the average person cannot keep track of those. Another problem is where you have crimes that are regulated to such a degree that the punishment no longer fits the crime. And we've been working to identify instances of that here in Michigan, where you'll see some misdemeanors that are penalized so aggressively that it doesn't really make sense when you compare that to other penalties that apply to other misdemeanors or other felonies. So there's a disparity in the punishment of certain conduct. And then the last category of crimes that we've been concerned about at the Mackinac Center is conduct that most people, just at a gut level, would say, that's just not wrong. It might be illegal, but it's not wrong. Things like dancing to the Star-Spangled Banner, which is a crime in Michigan. Why regulate that? Why have that on the books? And so, our view of what the criminal code should be is it should be an instrument that's designed to protect individual liberty and one's enjoyment of their personal property, but it should not necessarily be a tool that regulates every single aspect of human conduct. And so we've made recommendations on removing some of those laws from the books entirely, and also putting them into more of a civil regulatory structure as opposed to a criminal structure. That's everything I wanted to mention. We're going to have a very robust Q&A session, and so I hope you're already filling out your cards, and I'm going to turn things over to Miriam.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here today. I wanted to focus on three aspects of the problem, which are sort of similar to the three that you categorized. The first is criminalizing things that simply aren't wrong. The second is criminalizing activities that should be civil infractions and making things that should be misdemeanors into felonies, so basically ratcheting up the level of the offense. And the third is imposing excessive punishments when there is criminal conduct. So I wanted to start with this issue of criminalizing activities that simply aren't wrong in the way that sort of any average person would think about them. And to do that, I wanted to give you an example by showing you a video of two of our clients, Gabe Novak and Chris Wackler, who were arrested in Gabe's case and threatened in Chris's case because they played music on the street. So let's take a look at that.
And so I found myself having to spend 3 days and 2 nights in jail, and all I could think was, all I was doing was playing guitar for people. It was such an innocent act. I spent the summer in South Haven, Michigan, and I decided one day to take my guitar out and go to a local chocolate shop. And instantly the people loved it, and the owners of the shop came out and they gave me this little hot chocolate and everything. And it was really, really fun. There were families that loved it and little kids, and that's when I realized I wanted to keep doing that, and it just brought me joy and it brought other people joy. And then, an officer came up, and I thought it was a bit odd because I've never gotten in any trouble about that before. And he told me, I can't play there anymore. And meanwhile, there are all these families kind of looking at, like, what's going on. And I told him that I didn't think that was right. I thought that I had the right to play there, which it turns out that I did. So I ended up being charged with a felony by the officer for resisting arrest. And after I got out of jail, I started doing all this research and seeing these other people that were, being arrested.
They called in for backup, and I felt almost like I was put down a little bit because I'd never been told that I couldn't play in a downtown environment like Holland, where I had been playing for 3 months. And so to be stopped and told this was wrong, what I was doing, what I was playing, even though it was beautiful music and what I thought was having fun, it was hard to have them say that I couldn't play there anymore.
Public spaces, they are for the public. I think that free speech is essential.
So in our view, free expression or playing the guitar or the viola is not a crime, and it's not a crime if you do it on the street and you open your guitar case and families throw in $1 or a quarter. It's simply not criminal activity. We see a lot of these types of ordinances, especially at the local level, that are enforced in ways that are really problematic. To give you another example, we have a case in the city of Grand Rapids where the city of Grand Rapids enforces its trespass ordinance with respect to businesses that are open to the public. So for example, our client Tyrone Hightower, he was taking some friends to a club. He was a designated driver. He dropped them off. He was waiting to see that they would get into the club because it was a busy night and they were in line. And he was arrested for trespassing because he was parked in this parking lot. Similarly, another client in Grand Rapids named Kirk McConnor, he went into a store, bought a soda, walked out, ran into a friend. They're chatting in the parking lot. He too was arrested for trespassing. He was there for about 3 minutes before he was arrested for trespassing in this parking lot. And one of the most disturbing things from our perspective about overcriminalization in this context is that because this conduct isn't really anything anybody really thinks of as criminal, it's really enforced in a way that has a real disparate impact on certain communities, in particular communities of color. So for example, in Grand Rapids, when we looked at the trespass, how that was being enforced, the trespass policy was being enforced, we found that 70% of the stops under this policy that were initiated by Grand Rapids police officers were stops of African Americans, and only 30% were white. And when somebody was stopped for trespassing, they were 2.2 times more likely to be arrested and jailed if they were black than a white person. So when you have these crimes that aren't really crimes, it leads to really disparate enforcement across racial categories, racial groups. The second area I wanted to talk about was overcriminalization, in the sense of making something a more severe offense than it should be. So there's basically 3 levels. There's civil infractions, which are not crimes, but you get like a speeding ticket. Then there's misdemeanors, and felonies are obviously the most serious crimes. Before I came to the ACLU, I was a legal services attorney, and I worked a lot with individuals who couldn't find employment because they had felony records. It's a huge barrier to employment. And you always wanted to find out what was the felony in question. And I cannot tell you the number of women struggling, often single moms that I met, who had felonies for welfare fraud. And what did that mean in practice? What it meant was that they had gotten some kind of, and they managed to get a job that you're supposed to report. They reported it after 15 days rather than after 10 days. Sure, they should have reported it right away, but how many of us have ever turned in a form late? We didn't end up with felonies, right? I mean, maybe that's sanctionable, but is it a felony level offense to turn in a form late? In Michigan, it is. And now these women can't get employment because they have felony records. Another example, I represented an individual named Kyle DeWitt, who, well, how many of you fish? Any of you fish? A couple of you fish. I don't know the difference between a rock bass and a smallmouth bass, and you guys probably do. Mr. DeWitt didn't either, and he caught what he thought was a rock bass, but was a smallmouth bass, and it was out of season. He ended up in jail for doing that. That's a misdemeanor. You would think it's a civil infraction that's punishable with a fine. It is not. It is a misdemeanor, and he ended up in jail because he was fined and he couldn't pay the fines, and so they threw him in jail. We did a survey in Kalamazoo of their ordinances because they have a default provision that everything is a misdemeanor. And so here are some of the things that are considered to be misdemeanors or crimes in Kalamazoo. Displaying a city flag for advertising purposes, using profane language in the presence of others, spilling oil on the pavement in a public street, operating a snowmobile on the property of another without having in your immediate possession on your person a signed statement from the owner allowing you to use the property, and, wait for it, keeping rabbits. All of those things are crimes in Kalamazoo. Those are things that you would think maybe you make them civil infractions, you fine somebody if they do them, but you wouldn't make them an actual crime. Kalamazoo, to its credit, is revising its ordinances and looking at revising its ordinances to weed out some of these things and make things civil infractions rather than misdemeanors. But that's a serious problem in a lot of municipal codes across the state. And finally, the third area I wanted to talk about was just excessive punishment. So obviously there are things that are crimes, whether misdemeanors or felonies, that can and do and should get punished. But we have in Michigan really excessive lengths of incarceration for individuals. The Pew Center on the States did a report a couple of years ago, and they studied 35 states. The average prison term, this was in 2009, was 2.9 years across the states. That was the average prison term. In Michigan, it's 4.3 years. So it's much, much higher, the average prison term. And for assaultive offenses, so more serious offenses, the average prison term across those 35 states was 5 years, and in Michigan it was 7.6. So Michigan prisoners are spending about 17 months longer on average than in other states. And for assaultive offenders, it's about 30 months longer or 50% more than in other states. And that is money. I mean, we pay the cost for that as taxpayers to have these excessively long incarceration terms. So if the roughly 15,000 prisoners released in 2009, just that group had served the average sentence, the savings just for that group would have been $530 million. That's money that we can use for schools and roads and arts and lots of other things that we want to be doing in our state that we're not doing because we're spending so much money on excessive punishment. Not that there shouldn't be punishment, but we want to have punishment that's appropriate to the offenses, and we're way out of line compared to other states.
Thanks. Thanks, Miriam. And I want to say initially just thank you to the Mackinac Center for putting on this fantastic event. And thanks for being so great to work with. We work with a lot of state-level think tanks, and I think you folks in Michigan may not be aware of how lucky you are to have the quality of think tank you've got here at the Mackinac Center. It's really outstanding. The level of research that they're able to do, their technical expertise, their ability to put on events like this. I mean, you really are fortunate here. I also want to say thank you, in addition to Mike, my other co-author, my deputy director, Isaac Gorodetsky, who really drove the Manhattan Institute's side of the research here on this and is really our sort of state overcriminalization policy expert here. So I want to just sort of flesh out the theoretical issues a little bit first. We've already talked about them some, but I want to just sort of say that a little bit first. Talk a little bit about why the Manhattan Institute's here in Michigan. I mean, we're in New York. Why are we here in Michigan specifically? And then talk a little bit about some of the data that we've uncovered and that Mackinac's uncovered working together here in Michigan, because it's easy to point to anecdotes, but we always like to be sort of empirical and say, you know, are these outliers? Is this a trend? How do we compare to other states? If we want to analyze this, we want to sort of be able to do that as best we can in some sort of holistic way. So when it comes to overcriminalization, I mean, this is not necessarily a new problem. I mean, I think it's inherent in writing laws, right? I mean, Moses came down from Mount Sinai with 10 commandments. You don't have to read very far through the rest of the Torah and go to Leviticus and Deuteronomy and find out that there was a multiplication of laws that followed in the wake of the 10 commandments, right? And so to some degree this is inherent. That doesn't mean that there's not a problem in the multiplication of laws, particularly in the criminal context, when you can get criminal records, when you can wind up going to prison. The reason for this is what both the other panelists here talked about. Some of these types of conduct aren't inherently wrong. Any of you who've watched, may have seen the movie Legally Blonde, kind of a silly movie, but there's a scene in there where she's in the class and they start going through this back and forth with the professor talking about crimes that are malum in se or malum prohibitum. Well, malum in se are crimes that are wrong in and of themselves. We know that assault and battery are wrong, at least if we're not mentally ill, right? If we have capacity, we know that murder is wrong. We know that rape is wrong. We know that robbery is wrong, etc. I mean, so what we think of as the classic common law crimes, the traditional crimes, these are malum in se crimes. What we've had with the growth of the regulatory state is a huge swath of crimes that are malum prohibitum crimes. There may be a rationale behind the prohibition that legislators, or in many cases we'll find out regulators, have put together. There may be a rationale for why that conduct may be prohibited, but the person who is dropping off spare tires at a facility which purports to be a tire disposal facility, but in fact doesn't have a license, has no way of knowing that they're violating, that individual doesn't have no way of knowing that he's violating that prohibition. And this is an actual case. So this is an actual case in Michigan where an individual faced criminal prosecution for disposing of spare tires in a facility without a license, without any knowledge that the facility lacked a license. So that's the sort of problem we worry about, and we worry about innocent people getting ensnared in the criminal justice system. Even if there's a rationale for prohibiting some of this conduct, we don't think it should lead to potential criminal sentences, jail time, criminal records, and what have you. So that's the broader picture. Now, why are we here in Michigan? The Manhattan Institute is a national think tank, but we have a longstanding focus on state policy and local policy questions. So we've been working in criminal justice for a long time, and our focus traditionally has been in the area of policing. So this is where our ACLU friends, and we work with the ACLU on this issue a lot, where we sometimes have disagreements in terms of the types of police tactics. My colleague George Kelling developed with the late sociologist James Copland, the broken windows policing that was adopted in New York under then and now Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, and we think the evidence strongly suggests that these types of policing tactics led to the dramatic drop in violent and property crime in New York City that significantly outpaced the rest of the country. That being said, I want to emphasize, and the Vera Institute for Justice has a new study that at the same time, the number of incarcerated individuals in New York State has gone down significantly, which is not the case in the rest of the country. And so it's important to think about, we're not just saying lock up criminals, throw away the keys, and keep expanding the sentences or anything like that. And we can talk a little about where these flesh points are in terms of public order, and that's where we may have some disagreement. But I think there's broad agreement that we don't want a proliferation of crimes where people are unknowingly going to get ensnared in it. So we've been working in Michigan, we've been working in Detroit, both on fiscal issues as well as policing issues. Detroit obviously has significant public order and criminal law concerns and issues and crime rates. But as we started working on this overcriminalization area, most of the energy was in Washington. And so the National Association for Criminal Defense Lawyers and the Heritage Foundation came out with a study without intent, looking at the number of new crimes that were being passed by Congress that lacked intent provisions. It's not that Congress said these are all crimes and you're guilty whether you have knowledge or not. They didn't say anything. They just were enacting crimes and leaving it up to the courts to figure out afterwards what it meant in terms of what the mental state had to be if you were violating one of these malum prohibitum offenses. A lot of folks working on a task force that's come together, a bipartisan task force on the House side in Washington, and et cetera. But we sat and started thinking about it and said, well, we've got our Center for State and Local Leadership. We work with state leaders around the country. And most criminal law happens at the state level, not the federal level. And there's been a dearth of attention focused on that. So we started in our native New York, had an event there, and then went out to a series of states. And we were largely trying to pick states that were east of the Mississippi, so they're relatively accessible to us, large, so that we'd have a significant impact, and that we had at least anecdotal evidence that there was a problem in the state in some of the criminal law areas. And so we've been to Ohio and Illinois and North Carolina and Michigan. They're the states that we've been to and looked at. And this is our second report that we've worked on, the first being in North Carolina, and of course this report co-authored with Mackinac. The methodology for sort of counting crimes and counting the rate of increase of crimes was partially developed in the earlier study, which was borrowing from research done by a University of North Carolina professor, and partially done by Mackinac here in state. So let me just give you some of these numbers. The model penal code, I guess, is our modern answer to the Ten Commandments in terms of when the smart law professors and lawyers got together in 1962 and developed this model penal code for states. They had 114 sections. Most states have continued to add crimes to their criminal codes well beyond that. And Michigan's no exception, and in fact, to the extent it's an exception, it's an outlier with having more provisions. So Michigan has 918 sections in its criminal code. A lot more than 114, also a lot more than neighboring states. So Illinois, by contrast, has 571. Ohio has 415, Wisconsin has 384. So you have a lot of crimes in your criminal code. And that's not the beginning and end of the analysis, but it's worth pointing out that the criminal code itself in Michigan is over 500 pages long, over 266,000 words. And that's 10-point font, double spaced, to get 500 pages of that's the Michigan Penal Code. So a massive document. Almost impossible for any normal person to know all the provisions of that criminal code. But it's important to understand that there is a large body of criminal law outside the penal code. And Mackinac actually went through and did research and made an estimated count of the number of crimes in Michigan, and they came out with 3,102. Of those, over 1,200 were felonies and more than 1,800 were misdemeanors. Even that, however, is not adequate to capture the entire body of criminal law placing you in jeopardy. Those are the enacted laws. But there are hosts of catch-all provisions in the environmental code, the health code, the agricultural code in Michigan law, where regulations that are adopted by the administrative agencies in the states, not the elected legislators, can lead to criminal sanctions for the violation of those same body of regulations. And to give you a sense, I mean, the federal regulatory code is much bigger than regulatory codes, including Michigan's. But for instance, when the count was done of federal crimes, there were more than 4,000 federal crimes and more than 300,000 regulatory crimes. So the number of actual regulatory crimes probably dwarfs that 3,102 crimes that Mackinac has counted. Now, when it comes to the rate of addition of new crimes, we counted this going back over the last 6 years, and on average, Michigan is adding 45 new crimes to the books every year. 73% of these are outside the penal code itself. 25 of them are natural resource and environment, 25 are trade and commerce. For comparison, I mean, the only other state we've counted this rate of change on systematically is North Carolina, and that was 34 new crimes booked. So it's, again, this is not idiosyncratic, but Michigan seems to be adding crimes at a faster rate even than what we found in North Carolina. 44% of these new crimes are felonies that have been created in Michigan. So that's sort of a picture of where we stand. I also just want to emphasize the lack of intent provisions in a lot of these crimes. So you not only have the weird crimes, the Star Spangled Banner dancing crimes that we identify in the report, or the shaming a person for not accepting a challenge to a duel. This is actually a crime still in Michigan. But you have these other sorts of regulatory crimes without intent provisions. The scrap tire disposition we talked about. Transporting Christmas trees without a bill of sale. I think I did that. I think I did that this year. I picked up my Christmas tree at Home Depot. I don't think I kept a receipt. So
Careful to get mine.
yeah, so in Michigan, that would have been a crime, regardless of whether I intended to break that law or not. So very problematic. For those who are interested in farming, the pig farmer here is in jeopardy now because, again, this is a regulatory crime. The Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act creates the crime for waste disposal and all those other sorts of things. And then you have newly promulgated environmental regulations that have certain types of pigs that are prohibited species. It's not clearly defined. It's ambiguous. This is currently being challenged in the courts, so it may not hold up. But the Department of Natural Resources put this and let the government workers basically decide on a case-by-case basis. What does this mean? It means potentially a farmer could face a felony conviction, 2 years in jail, $20,000 in fines for unknowingly owning the wrong kind of pig. I mean, so this is a significant problem. So how do we fix this? And these are parallel to the recommendations we made in North Carolina, but I think we've tailored them somewhat more here for Michigan. And I'll start at the back. Our third is enact a default mens rea provision. What this means is let's create a presumption of criminal intent if it's not expressed. There's actually legislation to this effect that was introduced in the House last year and the Senate this year. It's not as strong as I would like. It's not quite as strong as what Ohio just passed, and Ohio has acted in this before Michigan, so you may want to follow them. But I think just getting this sort of situation in there where you don't have to litigate out each crime where the legislature says nothing, but in fact you're going to create a presumption, and you're not going to put people in jail for unknowingly violating a law unless the legislature actually votes on it and enacts something. I think this is an important step. And then the other two recommendations we have are really sort of to review the situation and go through the code as it is. So creating a bipartisan legislative task force like we have in the U.S. House we really want to look at this and figure out the scope of this problem. I think Mackinac Manhattan Institute have framed this up well, but there's a lot of work that is left to be done. And then creating a commission, or you have in Michigan a law revision commission. You could be charged with going through the code and actually cleaning some of this up, because you just have too many crimes on the books. And if you wanted to have a default mens rea in the interim, like Ohio did, that actually takes backward-looking crimes that have already passed and puts some sort of intent provision in there in the interim, I think that would be advisable. But if you don't do that, you better get to the work of actually reviewing the crimes you have on the books and going through this. So that was sort of a lot of things I covered, but I think it gives a pretty good sweep of the issue and what we've done in terms of our research together with Mackinac.
Okay, we'll go to your questions in a minute, but I've got a few myself. But first, Miriam, anything that Jim said that you want to respond to or elaborate on?
No, I guess, I thought that was a really interesting overview of the report, and I would just say that, we also agree that it's really important to go through the criminal code. first of all, to enact a default mens rea provision so that you don't commit crimes if you're not, as a general rule, that there aren't crimes when you don't know that you're committing a crime. I mean, the Supreme Court case law on this is that strict liability, in other words, you're responsible criminally, regardless of whether you know that might be appropriate in certain contexts where you're dealing with things like, handling explosives or things like that, where you're dealing with dangerous materials or dangerous situations, and so you can expect that your conduct is going to be regulated. But you shouldn't have strict liability in a situation where, you're standing in a parking lot and talking to somebody and you have no idea that that's considered trespassing. You're not intending to trespass, you're just chatting with your friend. You're not intending to, catch a fish out of season. You've got the wrong fish. Those kinds of things. Those should not be strict liability offenses. So we agree with that. And then I think in terms of, it is very important to have a commission look at the code. I think it's important to do this at a state level and also to do it at a local level. And in Kalamazoo, we've been working there. We went through the code, identified all of these crazy things that are, some of them are appropriately misdemeanors, some of them are civil infractions, but there's a lot of things that are really in the wrong place. And so we need to not only get rid of the things that are outdated, but also look at, and do this in a holistic manner, say, these things really shouldn't be felonies. These things are being punished way too much. I think it's a very hard thing to ask the legislature to do, because legislators, they don't want to look soft on crime, and so they're much more inclined to enhance offenses, which is how we got in this state that we're in right now. But if we do it in a holistic manner and say, a bunch of these crimes really should now become misdemeanors, a lot of these things we need to look at the sentences and really use our resources effectively in addressing crime that's real crime rather than ratcheting up sentences across the board. We should be ratcheting them down.
Okay, question for both of you that I've heard from a number of people, and it relates to some of the examples that you both gave dealing with silly laws. Okay, so in Kalamazoo, it's a crime to own a rabbit. It's a crime to display a city flag. It's a crime to dance to the Star-Spangled Banner or transport a Christmas tree without the right permit. It's also a crime to cause your pet ferret discomfort, however we calculate that. All these crazy laws. Is there really a victim? Are we really seeing a problem with that? Because surely no prosecutor is actually going to go out and bring those kinds of cases. So is this just a sort of a problem that we have on paper, but it doesn't actually translate into actual lives being affected?
Two responses to that. One is that, I think the really, really, crazy laws, probably dancing to the Star-Spangled Banner, I suspect that's probably not being enforced. But there are a lot of things that are being enforced. To give you an example, in Kalamazoo, and one of the reasons that we've been working on there, it's a friend of mine who's an attorney. Her cat attacked the prosecutor's cat. Bad choice on the part of the cat. She was charged that actually, because she's an attorney, she was concerned about this issue, and I think it was her partner who was charged with a misdemeanor because of having an aggressive cat. Now, most of us who have cats know that they're completely uncontrollable. They do everything. I have 2 cats, and they never listen to anything I tell them to do. And if I told them to attack the prosecutor's cat or not to attack the prosecutor's cat, they would certainly do the opposite. So you can face misdemeanor charges, and they did in this particular instance because they have an unruly cat. So there are offenses that are enforced where I think most people would say this is crazy. We really shouldn't be enforcing these types of laws.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Miriam just said. Prosecutorial discretion on average is going to protect most people with these kinds of weird laws. But I think we run a big danger in giving too much discretion over to the prosecutors or to the government officials, right? There's a reason why we might worry about saying what the IRS does, and the IRS could go in there. Oh, heaven forbid the IRS might target political enemies. Well, we may want to actually worry about that, right? That may actually happen. Prosecutors may do the same thing, Miriam talked about this a little bit at the opening. The people that are going to be most vulnerable here are often going to be minorities or people without any money, people who don't have the ability to get a good lawyer. And if they tick somebody off, the prosecutor, instead of making the case that they'd rather make, And then they may have a real case. They're going to go after, well, we can get them for this strict liability crime and hit them with that. Or heaven forbid that the prosecutor might be doing something that creates a barrier to entry and protects some other bigger business from a smaller business because they don't have the proper licensing. I mean, part of the reason we come at this as a think tank that focuses a lot on economic issues and economic development is the regulatory code is the friend of the big business and it's the enemy of the small business and entrepreneur. A big business has a compliance team, it has in-house counsel, it can figure out how to follow all these rules. The small business doesn't. And so it's insufficient to fix this problem just to focus on overcriminalization because it's a civil and regulatory question as well. But at a minimum, we don't want to put people in jail for innocently making mistakes here. So I mean, I think the prosecutorial discretion will most of the time matter, but not all prosecutors are going to do the right thing, and not all prosecutors, even if they're not acting maliciously, they may be acting improvidently, and they may not see the broader implications of what they're actually doing here. So I think cleaning up the code has merit in and of itself. I think it also just simplifying the rules. It's just something we ought to always do in government broadly, because rules are added to rules, are added to rules, are added to rules, and if it's a religious text, that's one thing. We respect the religious text on its own, but if it's state legislators adding rule after rule after rule after rule, they might be getting them wrong. Some of these rules might be out of date, but there's rarely an effort to go back and look at all these rules and clean it up. So you just add rule on top of rule on top of rule. They may be duplicative, they may be contradictory, and they may just really ensnare innocent people. So part of the reason why we focus on something like default mens rea is that it's really important to protect the innocent person. And this is the person that we think of as innocent. They may have crossed the line of the rule, but they didn't mean to. They were trying to do the right thing. And those are the people that I think our moral sense of justice says, well, they shouldn't be ensnared in this. And prosecutors are humans, and they make mistakes. Sometimes the wrong person could be a prosecutor. More often than not, they could just be using improper judgment in these cases. But in both cases, I think tying their hands here is a limited sanction, because if the person's really doing something that's wrong and they knew it was wrong, the prosecutor ought to be able to show that to a jury.
I'd like both of you to assess opportunity for reform here in Michigan. And Jim, I know you're coming from out of state, so I'm not going to ask you to psychoanalyze our legislature. But at the same time, I wonder what obstacles you see in the way of criminal justice reform and the ideas that we're talking about specifically here, and how we can navigate them here in Michigan. And then Miriam, you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, I'll defer to you folks on the idiosyncrasies of Michigan. What I can speak to is what just happened in Ohio. And that's something I was involved in. We did an event in Ohio about 18 months ago. I testified in Ohio in December. And at the very end of the last legislative session, the Ohio House passed unanimously the Ohio Senate's default mens rea bill, and it was subsequently signed into law by Governor Kasich. So this can be done. And ultimately, this was done and supported by legislators of both parties. So this was not a controversial bill at the end of the day. That doesn't mean there was not a long process in getting it from A to B. I wasn't in the room for a lot of these negotiations. I was more coming at it from the policy guy from the outside, talking about the broad picture here, but I was following this as it went along. And the people that were on the ground there, and what they tell me was instrumental, was really working together with the interested parties. And the interested party here, by and large, is prosecutors. If the prosecutors come in and say, we don't want this, we want to kill it, they're likely, particularly among Republican legislators who don't want to be seen as soft on crime, but Democrats don't want to be seen as soft on crime either. Like, they view that as a soft spot for them. So if the prosecutors come out and say we hate this, then it's going to be hard to get through. I mean, one of the advantages in Ohio was Ohio actually had a default mens rea provision in its law. Already, and the problem was more one that we could point to as judicial activism. The courts had basically through a series of interpretations, turned that default presumption on its head. And so it was sort of, we didn't have to say we were inventing something new in Ohio. Well, this was already what the legislature used to say they wanted, and the courts have sort of run awry. That was an advantage, but I don't think it was necessary to getting the support here. The reality was just getting the prosecutors to buy in, and where Ohio came down, and what they passed actually is a stronger form of what's already been proposed here in Michigan. Prospectively, the legislature has to put a mens rea provision in the law. They have to put a criminal intent standard in the law. They don't have to say that it's knowing and willful, but they have to say what it is. And if they don't, it's not a crime. They actually have to codify this going forward. Looking backward, the prosecutors, what we originally wanted was a default knowingly type of standard. Retrospective, the bill you've got here is only prospective. The prosecutors were worried that we didn't know what all these rules were, all these laws were, and what the implications of that might be. So the compromise position that was reached in Ohio was putting in a recklessness standard, which is far more stringent than a simple negligence or strict liability type of approach. It requires you to show that the person was at least behaving recklessly. These are legal terms of art, but it's a higher threshold. But they don't necessarily have to have knowing and willful commission. So I think that was a very, very strong piece of legislation. Again, I mean, this passed unanimously, was signed by the governor at the end of the day, but it required going back and forth with the prosecutors, and at the end of the day, the prosecutors gave their blessing, and when that happened, it passed through. If the prosecutors oppose it, I think it's going to be hard to get passed. That's just my instinct.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, what we've seen generally with criminal justice reform and sentencing reform in particular in Michigan is that where there's been opposition from prosecutors, from the Attorney General's office, from law enforcement, it's very difficult to make movement forward. I think there's a sort of a range of things going on here. One is just financially. There's an increasing recognition that overcriminalization, and particularly the length of sentences that we are imposing in Michigan, because they're so out of line that we're spending a lot more money than we need to be spending, than other states are spending on locking people up, even though the evidence is very clear that longer sentences don't affect recidivism. And so there's a strong financial incentive that people are recognizing increasingly to bring our criminal justice spending in line with what other states are doing. At the same time, from a prosecutorial perspective, if you can hang a sentence, try to get a plea deal with a average 5-year sentence rather than a 2.9, that gives you a lot more leverage. And so there are these competing incentives in terms of what different interest groups want. I do think that in terms of sort of the first steps that we're talking about with this report, in terms of setting out, getting a commission to look at this, those kinds of things, those are relatively easy asks because we're just asking to study this, to really look at this in depth and think about it. The much harder ask is actually then going to be to actually do the reform that needs to happen.
Okay, I promised you a chance to ask a few questions, and so if you could pass your cards to a Mackinac Center staffer, then we'll get several of those in.
One thing I want to comment on is the Mackinac Center has a news service. It's called Michigan Capital Confidential, and we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary of our electronic product online. We send out emails as well. And the print product has been around for a little bit longer, but 5 years of sending out the digital product of Michigan Capital Confidential. We call it CapCon for short. One of the things that we have found out through CapCon was there was a law on the books that was written in 1919, so 95-ish years ago, talking about, it was a dog law that said unlicensed dogs should be sought out and killed by the local county sheriff. And that was the law, to search out and destroy unlicensed dogs. So if you didn't pay the $10 licensing fee, your dog was in danger of being killed. And the law was written to kill the dog, not take it to a shelter, not find someone to adopt it, but the law was to kill the dog. That was only repealed last year after we brought that to the attention of lawmakers, and it wasn't enforced, thankfully. But for some reason, it takes time, and we even found that in 2011, I believe, and it was 3 years after even lawmakers knew about it to actually do something about it. So if you want stories like that mainstream media doesn't catch, please subscribe to Michigan Capital Confidential in our email, and we also send out a print product 4 times a year as well. One question I had for Miriam real quick, do you have an update to that lawsuit, or is that still in the early stages of the musicians?
The musician, that's still in the early stages.
Okay.
We just filed that, and so we'll be anticipating going into court on it soon, but it's recently filed.
Okay, very good. One of the questions is, the issue is not the law, but more so enforcement. How do you deal with the over-enforcement? Because you have things on the books, and then we have to have the issue of enforcement. Will these laws be enforced? Some are enforced, some are not. That's the question here.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's right. In other words, I mean, this goes back to the prosecutorial discretion point. I don't think most of these weird laws are being enforced all the time. But when we're talking about the rule of law, I mean, the basic principle of the rule of law, especially the criminal law, is you have the rule of legality. You're supposed to know something is criminal before you can be punished about it. And there are nuances there. I mean, mistake of law is not a defense in the United States. But I think having a broad, complex law that you can't follow and just entrusting your public officials always to do the right thing, I think is a significant problem. And at a minimum, it creates jeopardy. It creates risk. So if you're trying to start a business, like, gosh, I've got to comply with all these things. I don't know. I mean, this is a real cost to getting your business going. And if you're worried about going to jail, you better take these risks seriously. So even if they're not enforced much, even if the enforcement rates are low, how much are people going to risk getting a criminal record and going to jail if they're trying to start a business and they've got this complex regulatory code they've got to comply with? I think it's a real problem, having the laws on the books. I think the laws on the books ought to reflect what we really think as a society ought to be criminal, especially the criminal laws on the books here. And they ought to be clear, and they ought to have an intent standard, and they ought not be too many. Our complex society may require a lot of rules, but they shouldn't all have jail time behind them. And that's even aside from the sort of sentencing questions and the categorization questions and all the things Miriam's talking about. I think she's absolutely right on that.
I do think over-enforcement is a problem, particularly for certain types of low-level offenses and in particular communities. And the example that I talked about before in Grand Rapids, we have litigation around Grand Rapids trespass ordinance. Now, everybody, this is an offense that we know, right? We're not supposed to trespass on somebody else's property. You're not supposed to, go onto somebody else's property intentionally. But when you're talking about, so it's not that the crime per se is a bad thing to criminalize. It's just the way that is being enforced, because it's being enforced with respect to businesses. Now, a business, when they're open, you expect that you can go in there. You can go in and you can shop. You might buy something. You might not buy something. You might stand on your way out, as our client Kirk and Connor did, and drink your soda while you're chatting with a friend that you run into. Turning that crime into something that, and it's pervasively enforced in Grand Rapids because it's used as a way to essentially get stops and arrests in communities of color to try to, to look for other types of criminal activity. What happens there is that you use this low-level crime, and it has, and you actively enforce it in situations where it's really not appropriate to enforce it, right? I mean, it's one thing for someone to say, hey, somebody's trespassing my property, will you come in and, pick them up? And it's an entirely different thing for the police to be out there looking at somebody who's standing on a street corner talking with a friend and say, you know what, I could get this guy for trespassing. Maybe there's something else there. Let's go pick him up for trespassing and see if there's something else. That's a completely different thing, and that's what happens. And so you see aggressive over-enforcement particularly in low-income communities and communities of color of these low-level offenses that has, and then people end up with criminal records. They do not have, typically do not have representation when they go to court, and then they end up with criminal records that make them very difficult to employ. And so it creates a real cycle of poverty that is very difficult to break.
The one thing I would add to that is the point that Miriam made earlier. Even if enforcement isn't generally a problem, and I think she's got some good points that it is, but even if enforcement isn't a problem, when you have an environment of so many laws dangling from the tree branches, so to speak, that a prosecutor could pluck off and use as a tool against someone in the community, that is a problem. Now, I believe that individuals in law enforcement and prosecutors are exercising very careful judgment in the crimes that are prosecuted. So that's not to say that they're all crooks just on the other side of the law. We're not saying that at all. But you do have the problem of the law being used as a political weapon, much like we see with Miriam's friend with the vicious cat. You anger the wrong person, and you could have consequences where they have the law on their side. The other problem that I would point to is the erosion of the respect for law or the rule of law over time. If the law books are so populated with laws that we all know we can ignore, if you're in Kalamazoo, go ahead and have a rabbit. You know they're not going to prosecute that law. Well, if we have this environment where individuals are selectively choosing which laws they'll obey and which ones they won't, over time you have an erosion of the respect for law, and that really erodes at our ability to sustain a civil society.
These are all very good questions that we have here, and there's no way we're able to get to them. We're getting to the 1 o'clock hour, but one of the questions I think that encapsulates a lot of the questions here, and please do stay if you're able to ask your one-on-one questions of our panelists. The one question I think kind of bubbles to the top that kind of reflects a lot of these questions is, what can we, the people, the average citizen, do about this? We're sick of too many laws, selective enforcement, those kinds of things. Is there something that the common person can do?
Well, I have to say it. Support the Mackinac Center and the ACLU and the Manhattan Institute.
It's a good setup there.
We'll help you with that. No, seriously though, I think that raising these issues to your local lawmakers is a critical function. One of the things that we've been trying to do is identify stories of real people who are affected by the danger of overcriminalization. And the people who are most familiar with those stories are at the local level. If you've had a ridiculous crime prosecuted in your neighborhood, you've probably heard about it before people in Lansing will. And those help. They help personalize the problem. And talking to your lawmakers is a good step. And then feeding that kind of information to organizations that can help use that to advance a narrative can be very helpful.
I would say the same thing. I think bringing these cases to the attention of organizations like ours, and then contacting your local legislator about the bills that have been introduced and the need for commission and for law reform are really important steps.
Very good. Well, it's a little bit after 1 o'clock, but we do thank you so much for your time and attention today. And if you do have another question, please address it to the panelists afterward. And please sign up for Michigan Capital Confidential and download VoteSpotter. Information's on your table there. We'll see you next time. Thank you.